In the last module, we talked about the classical theory of concepts, the theory that supposed that to possess a concept is to possess a formula that describes its essential nature, what it is essentially to be that kind of thing. And it does so in terms of specifying, for example, the individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions for any object to be an instance of that kind. We noted that that theory made two predictions that look like they're false for a wide variety of concepts that we have in everyday life. On the one hand, the theory predicts that if you're able to categorize something easily and facilely, that means that you possess that set of individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions that you're using to categorize objects as instances of that kind. However, people are quite facile, quick, good at categorizing things without having that set of individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions that they have easy access to or that they can declare. And this seems like a problem for large swaths of our concepts. The second prediction of the classical view is that if something's an instance of a category, it's just as much an instance as any other. To be a member of that category, you have to have all the individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions. So every member is just as much a member as every other. But when we look at people's actual categorization behavior, we discover that in fact they exhibit typicality effects. That is, they have some instances that they are able to identify quickly and easily, and that there are others that they have difficulty with or that they're uncertain about. And these things are violations of the prediction of the classical theory. So psychologists began to develop a new class of theories, and we'll talk about two different kinds of that instance, the similarity probability view. And the first instance we'll look at is prototype theory. We'll talk about the conceptual structure of prototype theory, that is, that prototype theory supposes that to possess a concept is to possess a list of perceptually salient features, things that are sometimes described as the salient or central tendency of the things that we identify under that class. So we abstract what features are the most commonly had by objects of that category, and we use that class of features when we engage in the process of categorization. Under this view, the process of categorization is based on judgments of similarity, where how similar an object is to the prototype or the category is based on how many features they have in common, and that's accomplished by matching features. And we'll use an example of the concept of birds to illustrate this point. Then we'll talk about how it is that the prototype theory naturally explains and accommodates typicality effects as just a natural outcome of the way that it structures the notion of concepts and it conceives of the process of categorization. So to account for typicality ratings, researchers adopted the similarity probability view. They hypothesized that people represent concepts not as definitions, but as lists of features. Thus, concepts become fuzzy and exhibit typicality effects. Typicality effects arise because in categorization, people compare an object to their stored representation of a concept's features. They judge conceptual membership on the basis of similarity between the object and the concept that's measured in terms of how many features they share. Now, this basic idea has been cashed out in terms of prototype theory and in terms of exemplar theory, and we're looking at prototype theory first. So prototype theory presumes that people extract a representation of the central tendency from a collection of objects. And what that means is that they form an abstract representation or summary of the concept by listing the perceptually salient features that occur in many but not necessarily all instances. Within this summary, there may be some relative weighting assigned to features. Some features may be more important than others. And these representations then are called prototypes. An object is classified as an instance of a prototype if it's sufficiently similar to that prototype. And that similarity is measured by the number of properties that the prototype and the object share. Similarity of objects to prototypes explains the speed of categorization and similar effects. The more properties the prototype and the object share, the quicker the minimum level of matching is met. Psychologists came up with ways of operationalizing typicality, giving it a quantificational number as well as just specifying what the most typical features are, the most typical objects are. And they do this in a number of different ways by having people list off instances of a category, and the instances that get listed most often have the highest typicality, or they'll have them list off, as in this case, properties. This is a list of properties that people typically list off if you ask them to tell you what properties are common to birds. So they fly, they sing, they lay eggs, they're small, they nest in trees, and they eat insects. So when we think about birds, so we think about identifying or categorizing an animal as an instance of a bird. And a robin is going to rank very high because it possesses all of those properties. And we should be able to categorize it quickly, easily, and with great confidence because of that. On the other hand, penguins have only one of those properties. They don't fly, they don't sing, they're not small, they don't nest in trees, and they don't eat insects. They do lay eggs. And so they have some properties. And so we can see that categorization under prototype theory naturally introduces this differentiation in terms of typicality, in terms of how close something is to the prototype, how perfectly it matches that set of features versus how poorly it matches that set of features. So we can think about categorization and about the structure of a prototype bird concept by thinking about how particular instances of that concept typify or fail to typify all the central salient features of the concept. So robins are prototypical birds. They have all the properties that are normally associated, and hence they're central, very typical instances of the concept bird. Penguins, on the other hand, have very few of those properties, and hence they're pretty atypical, but they still have enough to get categorized as instances of the concept bird. One of the nice things about this view is it introduces this notion that concepts are vague, even ordinary concepts like bird. So think about something like the concept of a door. When you look at, say, the door to your front house, that's a very prototypical door. It has the features that you associate with a door. It's a receptacle between two places. It opens and closes. Maybe it has a lock. Those are all sort of prototypical things that you might associate with being a door. As we move farther and farther away from those kind of prototypical cases, then our confidence in our ability to categorize something definitively starts to diminish as well. So if you think about, okay, well, sure, that's a door, but what about sliding glass doors? Are they doors or are they windows? There are portals between two spaces. They can have locks, they open and close, but they don't seem as typical of doors as others. We might say, oh, no, sure, that's fine. What about thinking about, say, those connectors that we use to separate off lecture halls or parts of rooms, one side to another? They close off two spaces, they open and close, they often have locks, but they really don't seem very much like doors. What about, you go down to Venice Beach and you see those beaded curtains, right? Are those doors? Well, they kind of provide a barrier between two spaces. They don't have locks or anything. So as we move away from the more prototypical cases towards the more atypical cases, right, our confidence, our speed, our ability to categorize those things diminishes as well.